Competition painting. If you are more of a painter than a gamer like me, chances are you'll try it at some point. So in today's video, I want to share some of the lessons I learned from my unsuccessful competition entry, as well as what I am learning from the one I am currently painting. Because while competitions might seem like they are all about the trophies from the outside, I've found that they reveal a lot about how we approach painting itself. This whole video started with this model. Initially, I was planning to use my colorful underpainting approach and enter it into a small competition, just to see what would happen. My intention was to encourage you to try this fun and beginner-friendly approach yourself. And who knows, maybe even get a result good enough to show you that you don't need advanced techniques to paint something worthy of praise. However, even I wasn't immune to the pressure of asking myself, is this good enough to win? In the end, I abandoned the experiment and turned to more advanced brushwork and non-metallic metal, in the hope of increasing my chances of winning. But in doing so, I also removed much of what had made the project exciting in the first place. And looking back, I think that's a trap many of us fall into. We start a project because we're excited about an idea. Then, somewhere along the way, excitement gets replaced with expectations. The project stops being about exploring something interesting and starts becoming about proving something. Whether that's proving we are good enough or proving that all the time we've invested will be worth in the end. And while there is certainly value in pushing ourselves, I've come to realize that constantly questioning whether our work is good enough often takes far more away from the hobby than it gives back. Although the problem with my colorful underpainting approach, and probably with any start-to-finish process for that matter, is that we already know what 50, 75, and 100% of the process looks like. We have painted enough models to have a rough idea of how much effort those stages require. But competition painting introduces this strange feeling that 100% isn't enough. Suddenly, we are trying to reach 110 or maybe even 130%. And that's something nobody really teaches us. As a result, and I have experimented this firsthand, we can spend 3 hours working on a model and end up improving it dramatically, or only slightly, or sometimes not at all. The problem is that the closer we get to our best work, the smaller the improvements become. At the beginning, every hour feels impactful. Near the end, entire evenings can disappear in details that barely seem noticeable. And because most of us don't have much experience painting beyond what we normally consider finished, it becomes incredibly difficult to know when to stop. Should I keep highlighting? Should I add more texture? Should I repaint this section again? Or am I simply moving paint around because I don't know what else to do? I don't think I've found the answer to those questions yet, but competition painting has at least taught me to recognize them. And perhaps learning to identify when we're genuinely improving a piece versus when we're simply afraid to call it finished is a skill in itself. Now, reaching for that 110% does have its benefits. You see, repetition creates familiarity, while challenges create growth. As people often say, you probably won't improve much by painting 100 similar models exactly the same way. But if you challenge yourself a little more on each project, by the 5th one, difference can be remarkable. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily apply to the gamers in the audience painting entire armies. I understand that your goals are different, and by no means should you feel the need to change the way you paint because of the thoughts I'm sharing in this video. What I am trying to get at is that competition painting creates the perfect environment for a challenge. You have to experiment, you have to fail, and that's where growth happens. The reality is that most of the skills we are proud of today were once things we didn't know how to do, whether that's highlighting, blending, weathering, freehand faces, or whatever else we struggled with at the time. At some point, we decided to tackle them despite not being ready, and because of that, we eventually became capable of doing them. Competition painting simply magnifies that process. It forces us into unfamiliar territory and asks us to stay there longer enough to learn something from it. But painting competition pieces purely for the sake of improvement sounds a lot more noble than what it actually feels in practice. Because it is important not to make the mistake I mentioned at the beginning, comparing ourselves to others. Or worse, comparing ourselves to the imaginary version of others, like I did, convincing ourselves that our work isn't good enough before anyone else has even seen it. Now, Comparison doesn't always have to be a bad thing. For example, a bad comparison sounds like, why is their model better than mine? But a useful comparison sounds more like, what specific thing are they doing that I am not? The first question usually leads to frustration. The second leads to learning. Competitions are actually one of the few places where you can see dozens of painters solving the same problem in completely different ways. And if we approach those differences with curiosity rather than insecurity, they become an incredible learning opportunity. Because instead of walking away thinking, I'll never paint like that, we start asking, what can I learn from that? And that small shift in mindset changes comparison from something that drains motivation into something that fuels it. After all of this, I think the biggest lesson competition painting has taught me is that its value has very little to do with competitions themselves. The final result eventually becomes secondary. What stays with you are the lessons learned along the way, the mistakes that force you to rethink your approach, the weaknesses you discover, and the skills you develop by confronting them. So if you've ever considered entering a competition, even a small local one, I would encourage you to give it a try at least once. Not because you need to win to prove anything to anyone, but because stepping outside of your comfort zone is often where the most meaningful growth happens. And even if competition painting isn't your thing, the lesson remains the same. Every now and then, challenge yourself with a project that feels just a little beyond what you think you are capable of. You might surprise yourself. I hope you found some of these thoughts interesting, whether you are preparing for a competition yourself or simply looking for ways to grow as a painter. As always, thank you very much for watching, and if you have any thoughts or experiences with competition painting, I'd love to hear them down in the comments below. Have a great day, and I'll see you again soon.